एकम् अक्षरं हृदि निरन्तरं भासते स्वयं लिख्यते कथम्। हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् अहम् इति साक्षात् आत्मरूपेण भाति। हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वता वच्यता पवनचलनरोधा आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्। देहं मृण्मयवत् जडात्मकम् अहं बुद्धिर्न तस्यास्त्यतो नाहं तत्तत भावशुद्धिसमये सिद्धा न सद्भाव कोऽहं भावयुतः कुतो दृष्टात्मनिष्टात्मना सोऽहं स्फूर्तितया अरुणाचलशिवः पूर्णो विभाति स्वयं। सोऽहं स्फूर्तितया अरुणाचलशिवः पूर्णो विभाति स्वयं। Namo Ramana. In this, the Thursday Satsang from Ramana Maharshi Center for Learning, it has been our usual practice to read from the work Guruvachaka Kove by Muruganar Swamigal. We have been reading 2 verses, each verse reading followed by a meditation on its meaning, and that followed by a 10-minute practice session of self-inquiry. After these 2 segments are completed, there will be summing up remarks today by our president, Dr. Shardaka, and that will be followed by the offering of Sri Ramanashtotram. The chanting will be by Vaibhavji and Pratnama, and the floral offering shall be from right here by Manjunathji. We begin this evening satsang by taking up the first verse selected for us verse number 258. We find this in the segment investigation into truth. We have seen that the work itself is divided into, after the prefatory verses, the three segments are investigation into truth, meditation on the truth, and experience of the truth. Verse number 258, the subsegment is the heart. The heart is the subsegment. Verse 258, the title given is Aham Swarupa. Aham Swarupa. The mind that has died in one's heart. The ocean of Jnana Swarupa is eternal silence, Mauna. The mind that has died in one's heart. The ocean of Jnana Swarupa is eternal silence, Mauna. The transcendental expanse, the true heart, the rapturous sea of bliss supreme is one's true I, Aham, which is replete with love. The mind that has died in one's heart, the ocean of Jnana Swarupa is eternal silence, Mauna. The transcendental expanse, the true heart, the rapturous sea of bliss supreme is one's true I, Aham, which is replete with love. Since we identify with the body and more importantly with the mind, the verse starts with the mind that has died in one's heart. Mano Nasha. In Jnana Marga, we use the word Mano Nasha. There is nothing to be fearful of that, because it ends in the Purna Swarupa of the Hridayam. I used to have, he has merged in the Lord's feet, I used to have an uncle who was a Gayatri Japa practitioner. He used to do Gayatri Mantra Upasana for over 50 years, and he has written about it. And he was a devotee of Periperival. So from 2004 onwards, whenever we have met, since he knew I was practicing Bhagavan's teachings, he would very humorously try to poke at my sadhana and thereby invigorate me into a good amount of digging into sadhana by asking, what Nandu, what is this you are doing? Mano Nasha you are saying. Is it not that the manas should be filled with love and should be filled with happiness? It should be overflowing with joy. Is it not? Then I would always listen to him and not respond, because the Mano Nasha itself, as referred in the verse later, is itself the fullness of the heart. But in Jnana Marga, it necessarily has to be seen as Mano Nasha, not as Mano Laya. So that is why the sentence, the words in the verse begin with the mind that has died. Because in Upadesha Saram, Bhagavan says, Laya Vinashane Ubhayarodane Laya Gatam Punar Bhavati no Mritam, or Layam Gatam Punar Bhavati no Mritam. The two ways of quietening the mind are of Laya and Nasha. And the problem with Laya is that since the root has not been eliminated, the mind that is in Laya, it just again raises its head, Punarbhavati. Whereas when it is rooted out, when the distinguishing nature of the thinker, thinking and thought is totally eliminated and absorbed in the heart, there the mind has died. It is mano nasha. Then it does not, the level of the Triputi having been transcended, there is no thought at all that the mind will reappear again. So that is mano nasha, the mind that has died in the heart, in one's heart. The heart is called as the ocean of Jnana Swarupa. It is the ocean. When Bhagavan is asked, can your grace be considered as equal to the ocean? Bhagavan says in one of the interactions, ocean has limits, whereas grace of the Guru, grace of Ishvara is limitless. It is the limitless Jnana Swarupa. The Hridayam is the limitless Jnana. However, the analogy of the ocean is used because out of all the water bodies, that is the greatest that humanity has come to know. So the analogy has to be taken for its own level. It is the ocean of Jnana Swarupa. Really, it is the boundless Jnana. That mind which has died in that boundless Jnana is now said to be eternal silence. It is no more called Manas. The Manas has died and now there is only eternal silence. All the vasanas which would raise as thoughts have been exhausted and one is naturally resting in that heart which is the Jnana Swarupa, which is eternal silence, Mauna. Now, that is an immanent journey. That is a journey inward. That we go inside and find the immanent God. But that immanence itself is transcendence, because heart is the limitless transcendental expanse. So to find the God who has transcended time, space and creation, one need not do two things. Only the act of going inside and going for the mano nasha in the heart is enough, where one realizes the truth that the immanent itself is the transcendental. The transcendental expanse, the true heart, the rapturous sea of bliss supreme. That transcendental expanse is the rapturous sea of bliss supreme. Everything is seen as bliss. Everything is seen as ananda. When sannyasi asks Bhagavan in the first of the talks, how to see that the entire world, entire creation is only God. God, of course, standing for infinite bliss. Infinite rapturous bliss is God. How to find that the entire world is only that? Bhagavan says, Drishtim Jnanamayim Krutva Pashyet Brahmamayam Jagat. You make your outlook one of uncontaminated wisdom, then whatever is seen is only the Brahman. That wisdom cannot see any other than the rapturous bliss of the transcendental heart. The transcendental expanse, the true heart, the rapturous sea of bliss supreme, that is the one's true I, aham. The ego, which was clinging to certain things as I, and clinging to certain more possessions as mine, and was always seeing that the other things are not mine and are not me. Now that false I is now merged into that infinite expanse of the heart, and that infinite expanse of the heart is the May Aham, is the true I, is one's true I, which is replete with love. Now, that true self is only the form of love. Bhagavan says in Aksharamanamala, Ambuvil Alipol, Anburu Unilenai, Anbak Karaitarul Arunachala. You are the form of bliss. Anburu Unil Yenai Anbak Karaitarul. Let my contents and my attention going behind the contents be merged in you as the ice is merged in the waters. Lovingly complete this merger, O Arunachala, so that I also am one with your rapturous bliss, the infinite bliss, the bliss supreme, which is the true nature of oneself, that is the Mayakam. And that is the search that Bhagavan asks us to do. Don't find the truth of any of the objects or the world. Find the truth of yourself. Who am I? And whenever the I is related to some object, that is not the true nature of the self. So there, continue to investigate for whom is this objective dependence. For whom is this feeling that if the object changes from this to that, I am better off. Or if the object changes from this to that, I am worse off. Both indicate the falsity of that ego, the changing nature of the ego. There one has to inquire, for whom is this object? For whom is this thought? And seek the true self. There the mind dies in the heart. Manonasha, and one's own very nature is realized to be that eternal silence, Mauna, bliss supreme, heart, infinite bliss. Till that, Atma Vicharam will not leave us. And the who am I also will merge into that ocean of bliss, the heart. With Bhagavan's immense grace, let us sit in practice for 10 minutes. Revatima, you can help us out with the time. Thank you. Namo Ramana. The second verse is 440, verse number 440. We find it in the segment still investigation into truth. The subsegment is enquiry into consciousness. Enquiry into consciousness, verse number 440. There is a title given to this verse along with a few other verses. Attaining tranquility and remaining still is alone knowledge of reality. Attaining tranquility and remaining still is alone knowledge of reality. Verse 440. Apart from consciousness, there is no world. Apart from consciousness, there is no world. Apart from consciousness, there is no beloved Jiva. Apart from consciousness, there is no grace supreme. Knowing consciousness is indeed the supreme truth. Apart from consciousness, there is no world. Apart from consciousness, there is no beloved Jiva. Apart from consciousness, there is no grace supreme. Knowing consciousness is indeed the supreme truth. When asked about Arunagirinath's teachings, Bhagavan, in one of the instances, is known to have remarked a statement from Arunagirinatha about the supreme nature of consciousness. Arunagirinatha says, Arivai, Ariyum, Arive, Porul. Porul, of course, is truth, of course, is the supreme being. Arivai, Ariyum, Arive, Porul. That consciousness which knows itself is the supreme being, supreme truth. For that, three different negations are given to show how those objects are not the real area of enquiry to be made. In fact, an enquiry into those objects will be really complete and fulfilled only when one enquires into consciousness. Muruganar Swamigal says, apart from consciousness, there is no world. So, the world itself, in essence, is made of this stuff. All the pots are made of clay. All the jewels are made of gold. Similarly, the objective world, however solid, liquid, or made of other substances, is only consciousness. Therefore, Bhagavan says, instead of spending time in searching for reality, the truth in the world, search for it in the consciousness, because apart from consciousness, there is no world. Now, can we seek happiness by changing ourselves? The personality development or the personality improvement, will that lead us to truth? Here too, Bhagavan says, apart from consciousness, there is no beloved jiva. You want to refine the nature of the jivatva. I was like this, I am like this now. I am a better person. I am a better individual. And that is the true happiness, if I say. Then, since individuality itself is dependent on consciousness, this happiness which I base on and which I base on individuality will be found to be unreal and will be found to go away when the individuality merges or gets into laya in sleep. All the dharmic practices which are really good in aggregating ourselves, which are really tapas of purifying the mind, and which tapasvic energy may be needed in the enquiries. But once you have come to the enquiry has to be taken to its reality. Bhagavan says, once you have come to this point, you take the enquiry not into how to improve the jiva, how to convert the circumstances in which the jiva finds itself, but to inquire into the consciousness out of which the jiva is emerging. From what consciousness, what purity of consciousness, what source of consciousness is the I thought emerging? Let the jiva inquire into that. Then that is the inquiry into consciousness. So from the objective world, turn to consciousness. From jivatva, from individuality, turn to consciousness. Now the third object is, can there be a grace of God apart from consciousness? Apart from consciousness, there is no grace supreme, says Bhagavan. It may be a bit difficult to digest, but once digested, it will lead to appropriate, right and clear sadhana. This is where the pratibhasika satya has to be understood. So far as we believe that the world is created in time, and time is so superior that 5 billion years ago Earth was created and 60 years ago I was created, because my identification of my consciousness is with my body, I assume that the world is so long existing in time and so huge that it is 5 billion years ago and I am from 60 years ago. Whereas in Pratibhasika Satya, Bhagavan says, apart from consciousness, there cannot be creation. That is the first truth said in the first sentence. The consciousness and the world rise and set simultaneously. But the world is dependent on the consciousness. Therefore, look into the consciousness, says Bhagavan. Once we come to this point, the entire world and the grace of God on which the world is dependent, they come into existence not from outside of us, but from within us, dependent on the consciousness. The grace of God is also not apart from consciousness, says Bhagavan. So whenever somebody would come and say, I need grace to go within, Bhagavan would say, you already have grace. You already have grace within you. So inquire into that grace in the form of consciousness that is present by asking, for whom is this seeking of grace outside of consciousness? And go and inquire into that consciousness, Bhagavan would say. So there is no grace of God apart from consciousness. All the three are now said to be present within consciousness, dependent on consciousness. So inquire into that consciousness from where the I arises. That itself is the essence of the world. That itself is essence of all the individuals. That itself is the essence of the grace of God. That is why Arivai, Ariyum, Arive, Porul. The consciousness which is knowing itself is the supreme truth. It knows its own eternal presence. Therefore, it is the eternal truth, the eternal bliss. It is the eternal awareness of one's own existence. Arivai, Ariyum, Arive, Porul. With Bhagavan's immense grace, let us investigate into the truth of that source, truth of the I, from what consciousness it arises, by inquiring for whom is this thought? When thought of the world comes, for whom is this thought? When thought of the personalities come, what did they do? What am I going to do? For whom is this thought about other persons? When thought of God's grace, the unknown blessing which fulfills us, when thought of that, whether I have grace or not comes, you should ask, for whom is this thought that grace is outside? Then one is inquiring into the consciousness, the manonasha, it takes one to the heart, and there the supreme truth as eternal bliss is realized. With Bhagavan's immense grace, let us sit in practice of Atma-ucharam for 10 minutes. Revatima, you can help us out. Thank you. Namo Ramana. I request our President, Dr. Sharadaka, to give us the summing up remark. Namo Ramana.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana. Shining is the self in all beings. The immense grace of the self manifests as Ramana. We are gathering every week for the self-inquiry satsang on Thursdays and meditating on Bhagavan's teachings through the words of Bhagavan recorded by Muruganar Swami in Guruvachaka Kovai and practicing the self-inquiry. That so many of us, however many of us are gathering here for this satsang is itself the best proof that Bhagavan is providing us with the bliss of the self to whatever extent. Maybe some of us, when we had our self-inquiry workshop, some of us felt that we have not experienced really the bliss of the self. What does it mean? What does it mean that the mind will be destroyed? All these questions may come up. But something brings us back. What is it? What brings us back again and again to want to try, even to try and do self-inquiry? It is the bliss of the self. Of course, Jagadishwara Shastri says of Bhagavan Ramana, Swatmananda Rasanubhuti Vivasham. Bhagavan is just engulfed by the bliss of the self, by the experience of the bliss of the self. And we hear in the accounts of F.H. Humphreys, he says that little children, he says the most touching sight was that little children would climb up the hill, simply sit in Bhagavan's presence for hours on end and then get down at the end of the day without any thoughts, without anything else to do over there. Of course, it is said that Bhagavan would sometimes play with them, but very often Humphrey says when Humphreys went, they were obviously simply sitting there in his presence. And we have heard of the fact that even the animals would come and sit quietly in his presence. Even monkeys would sit quietly in his presence. The dog Jackie would sit gazing at him fixedly. What were they all experiencing? The simple bliss of the self. For us who have the human intellect, the question of Manonasha, Manolaya, what happens when the mind dies? What will happen to our role if we are not able to function? As Paul Brenton asks, will I become an idiot if I get back to the self? What will happen when the mind is destroyed? For all these animal devotees of Bhagavan, for children, there were no such questions as to what will happen when the mind gets destroyed. Will I become an idiot? They simply allowed themselves to be engulfed in that Swatmanubhava. Since we have an intellect, since we have all these questions, Bhagavan is telling us that once the mind is dissolved in the source, what remains is bliss. But actually, in the second verse, he says, everything is already engulfed by the self. It is not something which is going to happen. Everything is already the self. In Ekanma Panchakam, Bhagavan says, Tannul Tanuvirukka. When the body itself is inside the self, the ignorant one thinks the self is inside the body. So, what is getting destroyed? What is getting destroyed when one is already engulfed by the self? It is only the notion that one is separate. That notion has to be dissolved. Unless it is dissolved, one cannot experience the fullness, because that which stands between us and the fullness is that notion of separateness. that notion that one is a limited entity, which Bhagavan calls the Chit Jada Granthi. It is a notion of being something. But if we ourselves go within and we realize, even intellectually, we realize that when we are in deep sleep, we are happy. We are not worried about the loss of anything whatsoever. We are not worried about the loss of property. We are not worried about the loss of dear ones. We are not worried about the loss of our body and the loss of our mind. And we seek that bliss. Consciously, we want to go back. We want to go every day. We want to go into that deep sleep. So, where is that need to be afraid? Yet, the great ones are so compassionate. Bhagavan is so compassionate that it tells us, yes, this is our true nature. This is your true nature. Everything is only being. There is nothing apart from it. So you get into it. You get dissolved in it. Submit to it. And then you will experience the true bliss. Vidil savade manbam. Bhagavan says in Padigam, this world in which I am moving about, it is like I am moving about like a madman, worth nothing for this world. போர் வைத்திடில் ஆர்க்கும் இன்பிலை துன்பே வாழ்விதில் சார்வதே மாண்பாம் பைத்தியம் பற்றி பயன் அரும் எனக்கு உன் பதமுறும் அருமருந்தருள்வாய். I am actually useless in this world. What are we doing with the so-called alive mind? What can we do with it? What is it giving to us? This so-called alive mind is only giving us a series of thought after thought after thought, just producing continuous movie of events. That's all it's doing. It cannot do anything further than that. It cannot change a single event. It cannot manufacture a new thing. It cannot create something new. It cannot destroy a thing. It can do nothing, but it can only give a running commentary. What is the big deal of holding on to this mind when, by allowing it to get dissolved in the source through self-inquiry, then the separation goes. Until separation is there, sorrow is absolutely inevitable. Until any kind of separate entity exists, sorrow is inevitable, because if I limit myself, then I desire something which is outside of me. I fear something which is outside of me. Desire and fear are bound to come to me. Sorrow is bound to come to me. So Bhagavan, in his great grace and compassion, is giving us the option of getting back to the source, of allowing the mind to get dissolved in the self. And he is giving us the sweet path of self-inquiry also to help this happen. To help have this happen in which way? Very simply, நொந்திடாத உந்தனை தந்து என்னை கொண்டிரை. There is no pain in this dissolution. நொந்திடாது, there is no pain at all, says Bhagavan. Without giving me any pain at all, you have allowed me to dissolve in you. You have taken me and you have given me your own beatitude. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya.
Namo Ramnaka.
Namo Ramna sir.
Namo Ramna Vaibhavji and Pratnama. Can we start the chanting?
Yes, sir. Namo Ramana. भारद्वाज विश्वनाथ विरचितं श्रीरमणाष्टोत्तर शतनामावलिः अपार सच्चित् सुखवारिराशे यस्योर्मिमात्रं भुवनं समस्तं गुहाहितं तं रमणं गभीरं चिन्ताविहीनं हृदि चिन्तयामि. ॐ महासेन महोंसेन जाताय नमः. ॐ श्रीरमणाय नमः. ॐ गुरवे नमः. ॐ अखण्डसंविदाकाराय नमः. ॐ महौ ओजसे नमः। ॐ कारणोद्भवाय नमः। ॐ जगद्हितावताराय नमः। ॐ श्रीभूमिनाथस्थलोस्थिताय नमः। ॐ पराशरकुलोत्तंसाय नमः। ॐ सुन्दरार्यतपःफलाय नमः। ॐ कमनीयसुचारित्राय नमः। ॐ सहायाम्बा सहायवते नमः। ॐ शोणाचलमहोलीनमानसाय नमः। ॐ स्वर्णहस्तकाय नमः। ॐ श्रीमद्द्वादशान्तमहास्थले लब्धविद्योदयाय नमः। ॐ महाशक्तिनिपातेन प्रबुद्धाय नमः। ॐ परमार्थविदे नमः। ॐ तीव्राय नमः। ॐ पितृपदान्वेषिणे नमः। ॐ इन्दुमौळिना पितृमते नमः। ॐ पितुरादेशतः शोणशैलं प्राप्ताय नमः। ॐ तपोमयाय नमः। ॐ उदासीनाय नमः। ॐ महायोगिने नमः। ॐ महोत्साहाय नमः। ॐ कुशाग्रधिये नमः। ॐ शान्तसङ्कल्पसंरम्भाय नमः। ॐ सुसन्दृशे नमः। ॐ सवित्रे नमः। ॐ स्थिराय नमः। ॐ तपक्षपितसर्वाङ्गाय नमः। ॐ फुल्लाम्बुजविलोचनाय नमः। ॐ चन्द्रिकासितहासश्रीमण्डिताननमण्डलाय नमः। ॐ च्यूतवाट्यां समासीनाय नमः। ॐ चूर्णिताखिलविभ्रमाय नमः। ॐ वेदवेदान्ततत्त्वज्ञाय नमः। ॐ चिन्मुद्रिणे नमः। ॐ त्रिगुणातिगाय नमः। ॐ विरूपाक्षगुहावासाय नमः। ॐ विराजदचलाकृतये नमः। ॐ उद्दीप्तनयनाय नमः। ॐ पूर्णाय नमः। ॐ रचिताचलताण्डवाय नमः। ॐ गम्भीराय नमः। ॐ परमाचार्याय नमः। ॐ सुप्रसन्नाय नमः। ॐ अभयप्रदाय नमः। ॐ दक्षिणास्य निभाय नमः। ॐ धीराय नमः। ॐ दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः। ॐ स्वराजे नमः। ॐ महर्षये नमः। ॐ भगवते नमः। ॐ ईड्याय नमः। ॐ भूमविद्याविशारदाय नमः। ॐ विमलाय नमः। ॐ दीर्घदर्शिने नमः। ॐ आप्ताय नमः। ॐ ऋजुमार्गप्रदर्शकाय नमः। ॐ समदृशे नमः। ॐ सत्यदृशे नमः। ॐ सत्याय नमः। ॐ प्रशान्ताय नमः। ॐ अमितविक्रमाय नमः। ॐ सुकुमाराय नमः। ॐ सदानन्दाय नमः। ॐ मृदुभाषिणे नमः। ॐ दयार्णवाय नमः। ॐ श्रीशोणाचलहृद्भूतस्कन्दाश्रमनिकेतनाय नमः। ॐ सद्दर्शनोपदेष्ट्रे नमः। ॐ सद्भक्तवृन्दपरिवृदाय नमः। ॐ गणेशमुनिभृङ्गेन सेविताङ्घ्रिसरोरुहाय नमः। ॐ गीतोपदेशसारादिग्रन्थसञ्चिन्न संशयाय नमः। ॐ वर्णाश्रममतातीताय नमः। ॐ रसज्ञाय नमः। ॐ सौम्याय नमः। ॐ आत्मवते नमः। ॐ सर्वावनिमतस्थानाम् आराध्याय नमः। ॐ सर्वसद्गुणिने नमः। ॐ आत्मारामाय नमः। ॐ महाभागाय नमः। ॐ मातृमुक्तिविधायकाय नमः। ॐ विनताय नमः। ॐ विनुताय नमः। ॐ विप्राय नमः। ॐ मुनीन्द्राय नमः। ॐ पावकोज्ज्वलाय नमः। ॐ दर्शनादगसंहारिणे नमः। ॐ मौनेन स्वात्मबोधकाय नमः। ॐ ऋच्चान्तिकरसान्निध्याय नमः। ॐ स्मरणाद्बन्धमोचकाय नमः। ॐ अन्तस्तिमिरचण्डांशवे नमः। ॐ संसारार्णवतारकाय नमः। ॐ शोणादृशस्तुतिद्रष्टे नमः। ॐ हार्दविद्याप्रकाशकाय नमः। ॐ अविच्युतनिजप्रज्ञाय नमः। ॐ नैसर्गिकमहातपसे नमः। ॐ कमण्डलुधराय नमः। ॐ शुभ्रकौपीनवसनाय नमः। ॐ गुहाय नमः। ॐ दण्डपाणये नमः। ॐ कृपापूर्णाय नमः। ॐ भवरोगविषग्वराय नमः। ॐ स्कन्दाय नमः। ॐ देवतमाय नमः। ॐ अमर्त्याय नमः। ॐ सेनान्ये नमः। ॐ पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ॐ श्रीरमण भगवते नमः। श्रीरमणाष्टोत्तरशतनाम पूजां समर्पयामि। यस्थानोररुणाचलस्य पदयोः स्मृत्याजनिं प्राप्यत दिव्यानुग्रहसुप्रवाहविवश सादात्म्यभावं गतः ऋन्निष्ठस्वगभीरनित्यतपसा लोकान् पुनास्येकराट् तस्मै श्रीरमणाय ते नम इदं लोकोत्तरज्योतिषे। ॐ नमो भगवते श्रीरमणाय।
नमो 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 रमण सदाशिवप्रभावरण नमो महर्षि नमो महर्षि दर्शनसुखमङ्गलमुखसकलजीवहितसम्मुख ब्रह्मसङ्गिये सदा तुष्ट सदा हृष्ट सदा शिवानन्दपुष्ट परममहर्षि ब्रह्मनिष्ठ समदर्शी नमो 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 रमण सदाशिव प्रभावरण नमो महर्षि नमो महर्षि ನಮ್ಮ ಮನವದೊಂದು ಕಾಡು ನೀನರಿತಿಹೆ ಅದರ ಜಾಡು ಹಿತವನರಿತು ನೀಡುತ್ತೆಮ್ಮ ಕೊರೆಯ ತಣಿಸಲೈ ಬೇಡಲೆಂದು ಬಂದ ನಾವು ನೋಡಿಯೇ ತಣಿವೆವಯ್ಯ ಮೋಡಿಗಾರನೇ ಹಿತವನುಡಿದು ಪೊರೆ ನಮ್ಮನು ಬ್ರಹ್ಮ ಸಂಘಿಯೇ ನಮೋ 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 ರಮಣ ಸದಾಶಿವ ಪ್ರಭಾವರಣ ನಮೋ ಮಹರ್ಷಿ ನಮೋ ಮಹರ್ಷಿ बोलो भगवान श्री रमण महर्षि की जय
ನಮೋ ರಮಣ ಅಕ್ಕ, ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮೋ ರಮಣ.
ನಮೋ ರಮಣ ಮಂಜುಳವರೇ.
ನಮೋ ರಮಣ.